A snobbish CEO laughs at a struggling widow. The next day, she walks into his office with a document that ruins him. In the heart of the city, towering skyscrapers cast long shadows over the bustling streets below. Among these monoliths of steel and glass stood Carver Industries, a behemoth of power and influence. At its helm was Gregory Carver, a ruthless CEO known for his cutthroat business tactics and unwavering arrogance. Elise Harper stood at the gates of Carver Industries, her heart heavy with despair. The recent collapse of her late husband's business had left her financially devastated, and she saw no way out of the abyss of debt and uncertainty. With a deep breath, she stepped through the revolving doors, hoping for a glimmer of compassion from the man who held her fate in his hands. As she entered Gregory's office, Elise was met with a cold, dismissive gaze. The CEO leaned back in his leather chair, a smirk playing across his lips. "Mrs. Harper," he drawled, "to what do I owe this pleasure?" Elise's voice trembled as she explained her situation, her words tumbling out in a desperate plea for help. But Gregory merely chuckled, his eyes glinting with cruel amusement. "And why, pray tell, should I care about your little problems?" he sneered. "Your husband's failures are not my concern." Tears stung Elise's eyes as she realized the futility of her appeal. Gregory's staff shifted uncomfortably, averting their gazes from the heartbreaking scene unfolding before them. With a final, mocking laugh, Gregory waved his hand dismissively. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have real business to attend to." Elise fled the office, her cheeks burning with humiliation and anger. As she stepped out into the bustling city streets, she vowed that this would not be the end. She would find a way to fight back, to expose Gregory's cruelty and bring him to his knees. Unbeknownst to Gregory, Elise was far more connected than he could have imagined. Her late husband, Michael, had once worked alongside powerful figures who had watched Elise with growing concern since his passing. These individuals, bound by loyalty and a shared history, were determined to support her in her time of need. One such figure was Alexander Blackwell, a retired judge who had been a close friend and mentor to Michael. Upon hearing of Elise's plight, Alexander reached out to her, offering his guidance and resources. "Elise," he said, his voice warm with compassion, "you are not alone in this fight. Together, we will find a way to hold Gregory accountable for his actions." Elise felt a flicker of hope rekindled within her. With Alexander's support and the quiet strength of the community rallying behind her, she began to formulate a plan. She delved into her husband's old files, searching for any information that could help her case against Gregory. As she pored over the documents late into the night, Elise stumbled upon a long-hidden contract, its pages yellowed with age. Her eyes widened as she read the contents, realizing the significance of her discovery. This contract, signed years ago by Gregory and Michael, revealed a dark secret that could destroy the arrogant CEO's empire. Armed with this new evidence, Elise met with Alexander and a small group of trusted allies. They strategized, weighing the risks and benefits of confronting Gregory directly. Elise knew that she would be facing a formidable opponent, but her resolve had never been stronger. As they discussed their next steps, a quiet determination settled over the room. Each person present had been touched by Gregory's cruelty in some way, whether through personal experience or through the stories of loved ones. They understood the importance of standing together, of fighting for justice and the values they held dear. Elise's transformation from a grieving widow to a fierce advocate for change had not gone unnoticed by the community. Whispers of her bravery spread through the streets, inspiring others who had been wronged by the wealthy and powerful. Small acts of kindness and support began to emerge as neighbors rallied around Elise and her cause. In the midst of their planning, Alexander received a call from an unexpected ally. Jessica Langston, a former employee of Carver Industries, had overheard whispers of Gregory's misdeeds. Disgusted by her former boss's behavior, she offered to provide inside information that could bolster Elise's case. With each passing day, the movement grew stronger, fueled by the collective determination of those who refused to be silenced any longer. Elise stood outside the gates of Carver Industries once more, but this time, she was not alone. Beside her stood Alexander, Jessica, and a small group of supporters who had joined her cause. They marched through the revolving doors, their steps echoing with purpose and resolve. As they entered Gregory's office, the arrogant CEO looked up from his desk, his eyes narrowing in annoyance. "You again," he scoffed, his gaze flickering over the group. "I thought I made myself clear last time, Mrs. Harper." Elise stepped forward, the long-hidden contract clutched tightly in her hand. "I'm not here to beg for your help, Mr. Carver," she said, her voice steady and strong. "I'm here to expose the truth about your corrupt dealings and the lies you've built your empire upon." Gregory's face paled as Elise revealed the contract, the damning evidence of his misdeeds laid bare before him. He sputtered, his usual composure cracking under the weight of the revelation. "This is absurd," he blustered. "That contract means nothing. You have no proof." But Elise was not deterred. She had come too far to back down now. With a steely gaze, she laid out the evidence piece by piece, exposing the depth of Gregory's corruption and the impact it had on countless lives. As the truth unfolded, Gregory's staff exchanged glances, a mixture of shock and disgust on their faces. Some began to step forward, offering their own stories of mistreatment and exploitation at the hands of their employer. The confrontation had become a catalyst for change, a spark that ignited a fire within the hearts of those who had been silenced for too long. In the days that followed, the news of Gregory's exposed corruption spread like wildfire through the city. Media outlets clamored for interviews with Elise and her supporters, eager to shine a light on the dark underbelly of corporate greed and abuse of power. Elise found herself thrust into the spotlight, her story becoming a rallying cry for those who had been wronged by the wealthy and powerful. She spoke at community gatherings and rallies, her words inspiring others to stand up and fight for their rights. As the movement grew, Elise and her allies faced challenges and obstacles at every turn. Gregory, desperate to maintain his grip on power, unleashed a barrage of legal attacks and media smear campaigns. But Elise remained steadfast, her resolve only strengthening in the face of adversity. Behind closed doors, Gregory's world began to crumble. His once loyal employees turned against him, disgusted by the depths of his corruption. Investors pulled their funding, unwilling to be associated with a company built on lies and exploitation. Elise watched as the empire Gregory had so ruthlessly constructed began to topple, brick by brick. But even as she celebrated each small victory, she knew that the fight was far from over. As the legal battles raged on, Elise found solace in the growing unity of her community. Neighbors who had once been strangers now stood shoulder to shoulder, united in their determination to create a better future for themselves and their children. In the heart of the city, a small community garden had taken root, a symbol of the transformative power of collective action. Elise and her supporters tended to the plants, nurturing them with the same care and dedication they poured into their fight for justice. Among the garden's lush greenery, new friendships blossomed and old wounds began to heal. People from all walks of life came together, sharing their stories and their hopes for a brighter tomorrow. Elise found herself drawn to the garden, spending long hours there in quiet contemplation. As she watched the seedlings grow and flourish, she couldn't help but see them as a metaphor for the change she hoped to cultivate in her city. With each passing day, the garden became a symbol of resilience and hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, beauty and strength could still take root and thrive. As the legal battles reached a fever pitch, Elise received an unexpected visitor at her home. Standing on her doorstep was none other than Victoria Carver, Gregory's estranged daughter. Victoria, a successful entrepreneur in her own right, had long been disgusted by her father's business practices. She had distanced herself from him years ago, determined to build a life and career based on integrity and compassion. "I've been following your story," Victoria said, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and admiration. "What you're doing, it's brave. It's necessary. And I want to help." Elise invited Victoria inside, and the two women talked for hours, sharing their experiences and their hopes for a better future. Victoria offered her resources and connections, promising to stand with Elise in her fight against Gregory. As word of Victoria's support spread, other members of the wealthy elite began to take notice. Some, like Victoria, were moved by Elise's courage and the growing movement for change. They pledged their own resources and influence, determined to be part of the solution rather than the problem. Slowly but surely, the balance of power began to shift, and Elise found herself at the forefront of a movement that extended far beyond her own personal struggle. With Victoria's support and the growing momentum of the movement, Elise and her allies organized a massive rally in the heart of the city. Thousands of people gathered, their voices raised in a collective cry for justice and accountability. Elise took the stage, her heart pounding with a mixture of nerves and exhilaration. As she looked out over the sea of faces, she saw the same determination and hope that had carried her through her darkest moments. "We are here today because we refuse to be silenced any longer," she began, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "We are here because we believe in a world where compassion and integrity triumph over greed and corruption." As Elise spoke, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. People of all ages and backgrounds stood united, their differences forgotten in the face of a common goal. In that moment, Elise felt a surge of power and purpose unlike anything she had ever experienced. She knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but with the strength of her community behind her, she felt invincible. As the rally drew to a close, Elise was approached by a reporter from a major news network. The young woman, her eyes bright with curiosity, asked for an interview. Elise hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether she was ready to share her story with the world. But as she looked around at the faces of her supporters, she knew that her voice mattered. In front of the cameras, Elise spoke from the heart, sharing her journey from grief and despair to courage and hope. She talked about the power of community, the importance of standing up for what was right, and the transformative impact of small acts of kindness. As the interview aired that evening, Elise's words resonated with people across the country. Letters and emails poured in from individuals who had been touched by her story, sharing their own experiences of injustice and their dreams for a better world. Elise read each message with tears in her eyes, humbled by the outpouring of support and love. She knew that her fight was no longer just her own, it had become a beacon of hope for countless others who had been silenced for too long. As the legal case against Gregory Carver reached its climax, Elise and her allies prepared for the final showdown. They gathered evidence, rehearsed their testimonies, and steeled themselves for the battle ahead. On the day of the trial, the courthouse was packed with reporters, supporters, and curious onlookers. Elise took her place at the plaintiff's table, her heart racing as she faced the man who had once seemed so untouchable. Throughout the proceedings, Gregory's lawyers fought tooth and nail to discredit Elise and her supporters. They painted her as a vengeful widow, a woman scorned by grief and desperation. But Elise remained unshakable, her voice steady and clear as she presented the evidence of Gregory's misdeeds. As the trial progressed, a pattern began to emerge. Witness after witness took the stand, each one sharing their own stories of exploitation and abuse at the hands of Gregory Carver and his company. With each testimony, the tide began to turn. The jury, once skeptical, now listened with rapt attention, their faces etched with growing disgust and outrage. In the end, the verdict was unanimous. Gregory Carver was found guilty of fraud, embezzlement, and a host of other crimes. As the judge handed down the sentence, a hush fell over the courtroom. Elise felt a rush of emotions, relief, vindication, and a profound sense of hope for the future. She knew that this was just the beginning, but it was a powerful first step towards a more just and compassionate world. In the wake of Gregory's conviction, Elise found herself at a crossroads. The fight had consumed her for so long, and now that it was over, she wasn't quite sure what to do next. As she sat in her quiet apartment, surrounded by the remnants of her old life, a knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Alexander and Jessica, their faces beaming with pride and affection. "We did it," Jessica said, her voice trembling with emotion. "We actually did it." Elise invited them inside, and together they sat in silence for a long moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Alexander spoke. "You know, Elise," he said, his eyes twinkling with mischief, "I've been thinking. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, but we've also got a lot of momentum. What do you say we keep this thing going? Elise looked at him, puzzled. What do you mean? Alexander leaned forward, his voice low and conspiratorial. I mean, let's take this fight to the next level. Let's build something new, something better. A community foundation dedicated to supporting those who have been left behind by the system. Elise felt a spark of excitement ignite within her. She had never considered herself a leader, but the idea of continuing the work she had started, of building something lasting and meaningful, filled her with a sense of purpose. Together, they began to plan, sketching out ideas and strategies late into the night. And as the sun rose over the city, Elise felt a renewed sense of hope and determination. The fight was far from over, but she knew that with her friends by her side, anything was possible. In the months that followed, Elise and her team threw themselves into the work of building their new foundation. They reached out to community leaders, activists, and ordinary citizens, listening to their stories and their dreams for a better future. They established programs to support small businesses, to provide education and job training for those who had been left behind, and to advocate for policy changes that would level the playing field for all. At the heart of their work was the community garden, which had grown and flourished under the care of countless volunteers. It had become a symbol of hope and resilience, a place where people from all walks of life could come together and build something beautiful. Elise spent long hours in the garden, tending to the plants and talking with her neighbors. She marveled at the way that small acts of kindness and compassion could ripple outwards, touching lives in ways she had never imagined. And as the foundation grew and thrived, Elise began to see the impact of her work in the faces of those around her. She saw hope where there had once been despair, courage where there had once been fear, and unity where there had once been division. She knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but she also knew that she was not alone. With the strength of her community behind her, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the years passed, Elise watched as her city began to transform. The seeds of change that she and her allies had planted took root and flourished, spreading outwards in ways she could never have predicted. The Community Foundation became a beacon of hope and support, a place where those who had been forgotten could find the resources and encouragement they needed to build a better life. Elise herself became a mentor and guide to a new generation of activists and leaders, passing on the lessons she had learned and the wisdom she had gained through her own struggles. And as she looked out over the city she loved, she saw a place that was more just, more compassionate, and more united than it had ever been before. She thought back to that fateful day when she had stood in Gregory Carver's office, her heart heavy with despair and her future uncertain. She marveled at the journey she had taken since then, at the courage and resilience she had found within herself and within her community. And she knew, with a certainty that filled her heart with joy, that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, united in their commitment to building a world where every voice was heard and every life was valued. Years later, Elise sat in the community garden, her hair now silver and her face lined with the wisdom of age. Around her, the garden was alive with the laughter of children and the chatter of neighbors, a vibrant testament to the power of community and connection. As she sat lost in thought, a young woman approached her, her eyes shining with admiration and curiosity. "Excuse me," the woman said, "are you Elise Harper?" Elise smiled, nodding in confirmation. The woman sat down beside her, her voice filled with excitement. "I've heard so much about you," she said. "About how you stood up to Gregory Carver, about how you built this incredible foundation. You're an inspiration to so many of us." Elise felt a rush of emotion, her eyes filling with tears. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "But I didn't do it alone. None of this would have been possible without the support and courage of so many others." The young woman nodded, her face thoughtful. "I know," she said. "But that's what makes it so powerful. The idea that we're all in this together, that we all have a role to play in making the world a better place." Elise reached out, taking the woman's hand in her own. "Never forget that," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "No matter how small or insignificant you may feel, your actions have the power to change lives, to inspire others, to create ripples of hope and compassion that will spread farther than you can ever imagine. The woman smiled, her eyes shining with determination. "I won't forget," she promised. "And I'll keep fighting, just like you did. For a world where everyone has a chance to thrive." As the sun began to set over the city, Elise looked out over the garden, her heart filled with a profound sense of peace and purpose. She knew that the journey was far from over, that there would always be new challenges to face and new battles to fight. But she also knew that as long as there were people willing to stand up for what was right, as long as there were communities willing to come together in love and solidarity, there would always be hope. And with that hope, anything was possible. As the years continued to pass, Elise watched with pride as the seeds of change she and her allies had planted continued to grow and flourish. The Community Foundation became a model for similar organizations across the country, inspiring a new generation of activists and leaders to take up the fight for justice and equality. Elise herself became a sought-after speaker and mentor, sharing her story and her wisdom with audiences around the world. She spoke of the power of resilience, of the importance of standing up for what was right, and of the transformative impact of small acts of kindness and compassion. And as she looked back on her life, she realized that the greatest lesson she had learned was the one she had always known deep down, that the true measure of a life well lived was not in the accolades or the achievements, but in the love and compassion one showed to others. She thought of the countless lives she had touched, of the friendships she had forged, and the communities she had helped to build. She thought of the young woman in the garden, and of the countless others like her who were taking up the fight for a better world. And she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, no matter how dark the night may seem, there would always be hope as long as there were people willing to light the way. As Elise sat in her favorite chair in her cozy living room, surrounded by pictures of her loved ones and mementos of a life well lived, she felt a deep sense of peace wash over her. She knew that her work was not finished, that there would always be more to do and more to learn. But she also knew that she had made a difference, that she had left the world a little bit better than she had found it. And in the end, that was all any of us could hope for. As she closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep, Elise's mind was filled with dreams of a future she knew she would never see, but one she had helped to shape through her actions and her love. And somewhere, in a garden filled with the laughter of children and the chatter of neighbors, a young woman stood tall and proud, ready to take up the fight and carry on the legacy of hope and compassion that Elise had left behind. For in the end, that was the true power of Elise's story, not in the battles she had won or the accolades she had earned, but in the lives she had touched and the seeds of change she had planted. And as long as those seeds continued to grow and flourish, as long as there were people willing to stand up for what was right and fight for a better world, Elise knew that her legacy would live on, a shining beacon of hope and inspiration for generations to come.